We'll now be transitioning to the final session of sessions of today's programs. I'm really happy to introduce today's panelists, two professionals bringing unique perspective to our discussions about basic clinical, population, outcomes, or implementation research. I'll begin by introducing Dr. Desmond Schatz. Dr. Schatz is professor and interim research an interim chair of pediatrics, medical director of the Diabetes Institute, and director of the Clinical Research Center within the CTSI at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Dr. Schatz has been involved in type 1 diabetes research since the mid-1980s and has published over 360 manuscripts, the majority related to the prediction, natural history, genetics, immunopathogenesis, and prevention of the disease, as well as the management of children and adolescents with type 1 diabetes. He's the principal investigator on several NIH awards. Dr. Schatz recently received the 2028 Alan J. Garber, MD, PhD, Lectureship Award, and was the 2020 recipient of the University College of Medicine Lifetime Achievement Award for Distinguished Service in Patient Care, Education, Research, and Leadership. We also have with us today Dr. Janice Hwang. Dr. Hwang is an endocrinologist and assistant professor in the Division of Endocrinology at the Yale School of Medicine. She received her fellowship training in endocrinology and metabolism at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Hwang's academic interests are at the intersection of metabolism, neuroscience, and imaging. Her research focuses on using advanced brain imaging modalities such as functional MRI and magnetic resonance spectroscopy, coupled with classic investigative techniques in metabolism to understand the effects of diabetes and obesity on the brain. Her research has been supported by the National Institutes of Health, the Yale Diabetes Research Center, the Endocrine Fellows Foundation, and the American Diabetes Association. Dr. Hwang is the recipient of several awards for her research, including the Marilyn Fishman Award for Diabetes Research, the Metabolism Junior Investigator Award, as well as a Yale Center for Clinical Investigation Junior Faculty Scholars Award. Welcome, Dr. Schatz and Hwang.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to encourage the participation again of the fellows. And so please, either raise your hand or if you want to just put questions into the chat. But let's go ahead and get started a little bit. And I'd love to hear each of you tell us a little bit about your own research beginnings and how you got started.
Okay, I will start, and then we can tag team with Janice. But I think my own interest in clinical research was sparked at my very first American Diabetes Association scientific sessions meeting in the mid-1980s. And I was a fellow, and my abstract on really the natural history of islet autoantibodies in type 1 diabetes had been accepted for an oral presentation. And honestly, I remember it as though it was yesterday. I was terrified. I had to remake the slides on multiple occasions because this was before PowerPoint. And I practiced it over and over again. And somehow I survived. And I think that over the years, I have been very fortunate to be the recipient of a wonderful bench to bedside group of physicians and scientists at the University of Florida, which I think, by the way, is key to your success, which is teamwork. And I think I'll just pass that on to Janice.
Yeah, so thank you. And first of all, it's an honor for me to be here to be talking to you all. And I have a very similar story. I mean, you all are endocrinologists, so you must love physiology. And I think if you love physiology, then it almost becomes a natural thing when you start to question, why do things work this way? Why do things communicate the way they do? And so it just became a very natural thing to want to study something a little bit deeper. and pursue, sort of physiology-based mechanistic research, which is what I'm really interested in doing. And there's no better field, I think, than endocrinology, and especially diabetes, for doing that. We wanted to keep our own personal intros a little short so that we could open it up for a lot of questions and to get into the details of, what you guys are thinking about and wondering about.
Yes, thank you so much for that point. This is really this is geared for you all as the audience, and so I'd love you to help us drive the conversation. I'm happy to participate in that as well, but please do ask your questions about. There's all sorts of various things, and so one of the ways I'll get started is Dr. Schatz, tell us a little bit about how the ADA helped you develop into a physician scientist.
So, there has always been a paucity, there is a paucity of physician scientists. There is a dramatic need. There's a dramatic need for physicians, for scientists, for MDs, for MD PhDs, and particularly for women. We're really less than a quarter of the workforce, the scientific workforce, are women in every area. But the ADA has really encouraged me. I got my first grant from the American Diabetes Association. It was a postdoctoral fellowship, and with that award, I got involved with the American Diabetes Association and really, developed not only the research, but got involved in the community, got involved in advocacy, got involved in committees. And really, the American Diabetes Association has played such an important role in my own career, because it's helped me develop not only as a physician scientist, but also as a physician, as someone who cares, someone for the greater good, not just for patients. Yes, I do research, but it's also for the community. And ultimately, the focus of the American Diabetes is to do research to prevent and cure diabetes, but ultimately to improve the lives of all patients with diabetes. And I want to encourage you, not only at the level of a physician, as a scientist, but also at the level of who you are, to become involved in the ADA to ultimately drive the mission.
Thank you so much. And actually, one opportunity, again, in this virtual format, it's a little harder to get to know each other for the fellows. So we'd love to hear about what research projects you're working on during your fellowship. And so maybe just a one-liner about the topic you're working on in the chat would be really nice. And that might also help drive some of our discussion. I really appreciate that you mentioned the women. I'm a fellowship program director. And so, endocrine I'm also on the Women in Medicine committee at the university. And we typically have the reverse problem in endocrinology historically, where we've had many more women than men applicants. And so I haven't had that issue, but in our science, as you mentioned, we really do need more, women researchers. And Dr. Hwang, this is something you're particularly passionate about. And so can you tell us about some of the benefits and challenges of balancing a scientific career and home and family life? This doesn't, of course, apply only to women, but I know this is a topic you're particularly interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm so passionate about this because I think when I was just starting off as an endocrine fellow, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know 100% if I wanted to pursue a career in research, even though I love physiology and I love science and I loved research. But the word on the street was that, funding is terrible. You're just going to be slaving away and, everyone's dropping out. And so it was really a little bit intimidating. And, you have this vision of having to, be there at 6 a.m. and being in your wet lab bench laboratory until 8 p.m. at night, and you can't see your children. And so it was, it's a little intimidating to think about it that way. But I guess what I can say as someone who is pretty junior, I'm fifth year into my assistant professor. So I'm, about there. I just finished my K award. I've been very fortunate to have received some funding from the ADA as well as from the NIH with 2 R01s now. And I can tell you all that if you're worried about that, a career in research is actually such a wonderful thing in terms of wanting to also have a family and to have a balanced life, because you get, even though you have to work really hard, you have so much autonomy. You have so much control over how you want to structure your day. And so if I need to take a couple hours off and, go read to my kids at school, I can do that. Because I run my own lab and I can organize my experiments the way they need to be. And so that flexibility has actually been a really wonderful thing. And, I would also say that, and this is maybe not so much in particular to being a woman and having family and things like that, but there's something really wonderful about having every day being a little bit different. You get to use all sorts of skills that beyond just, seeing patients and things like that. And you're always growing. And so, I found it to be very, very rewarding. And, my kids know that I'm a scientist and I'm a doctor, and they really like that. They like to hear about the science that I'm doing. I try to explain the experiments, and they have questions at the dinner table. And so it's a very rewarding thing. And so if that's one thing I can share with you all is, and I can talk about this for hours, but I'm going to stop, is that it is a really great life to have. It's hard work, but any field is hard work if you want to do a good job.
Well, congratulations on your R01s. It's very, very nice accomplishment to hear about, at your relatively now early to mid stage. So you mentioned funding, and I know that this is something that is sort of what is perceived as a barrier by some fellows, is the concern, how will they fund their careers and their research grants? And it can also be somewhat overwhelming. Where do you go to get grants? There's so many different places. And so, Dr. Schatz, what are your, what's your advice on this?
So I think that really within the last few years, the NIH, the American Diabetes Association, with its focus on young investigators, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and then other organizations, including the Helmsley Trust, have really, I think, rallied to address some of these issues. And some of these include loan forgiveness programs. There's more clinical research, that developmental awards. There's really now adequate representation of clinical researchers on review panels for clinical research grants, and also, having been on the other side, attempting to streamline, standardize, and simplify the regulatory requirements. But I think if we'll get to this in a while, what are the things that you're going to hear that's going to make you successful? And I think we'll get to that perhaps as a next question, after certainly we hear from Janet, if she wants to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to add to say that, it always, at least in my experience, all those places that Dr. Schatz mentioned are great places to look. And then also at your own institutions, oftentimes all you need is a little tiny bit of pilot. Like, don't think that you need a huge amount of money or whatnot. Even a little bit is just enough to get started. And if you start to collect a couple of pilots here and there, then all of a sudden, then that parlays into, foundation or small NIA, and so I was very fortunate. That's exactly what I did. I had, one or two very, very small, like less than $1,000 from my institution, and then was able to do a little bit, and then ultimately, did receive some funding from the ADA, which we really jump started everything. And so just keep an open mind, and don't look down on the small sums. Those pilot funds are there for a reason.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at the chat, and it's really lovely to see the sort of diversity of interests that are very well covered in this group. I wish we had time to go through each of these, but we see basic all research, community research, translational, clinical trials in both adult and pediatrics. And so our panelists, if you want to comment on anything in particular, but otherwise, I'd like to welcome Dr. Schatz back to your question that you were mentioning before.
So I hope we get to there's so much to talk about. There's just not enough time. But the title was basic clinical outcome or implementation research, population research, and hopefully I can show you a slide if we get to that. But most importantly, you're asking about what it's going to take to be successful. And you've already heard about mentors. And I just want to emphasize that you guys need to choose an environment where you have accomplished mentors and that there's really, the atmosphere is a buzz. And you want to get a research team where it's not just to get funding, but really that you want to confront these problems of mutual interest and that will share your ideas, share the resources, and then most importantly for all of you young people, which is going to lead to publishing. And again, I want to always challenge you. Something that I've done and been encouraged to do and want to encourage you to do is to challenge the status quo. Always challenge it, and a little skepticism. Do it in the right way. I mean, don't be discouraged also if the questions or the data leads to dead ends, and sometimes you've got to be satisfied with the null hypothesis. And when you're satisfied with the null hypothesis, then maybe you'll get onto a new path and a new road. But I will always say you've got to aim high and you've got to persevere. And my son once said to me, and it's not a new saying, but an old saying, that that you're going to miss 100% of the shots that you don't take on a basketball court. So just be patient. Don't get despondent. Never despair if you get a rejected manuscript or a grant. But I think that there is such opportunity ahead as we enter so many of the fields, which if we've got time we can address.
Well, let's go ahead and address your slide. If I'm going to ask our producer Gil if you wouldn't mind pulling that up, and then we can ask Dr. Hwang some specifics as well.
Okay, I just really could take a long time to do this, but really want everybody to sort of see it and start off on the left-hand side with basic science discovery. And that's really where it starts. New ideas, fundamental theories, unanswered question, investigation into something that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's really where it starts. And for some of you, that's where you're going to go, into the basic science. But then you're going to go through what the NIH has just classified as T1, T2, T3, and T4 research. And I just want to sort of summarize briefly T1. And again, there's opportunities for all of you at every single level. T1 is phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, or really observational studies. And the question that's asked under T1 is what works under control conditions, because we want to translate from mouse to human and then to the bedside, which is really clinical efficacy. And so then that gets to phase 3 trials. And, yes, there's systematic reviews, evidence-based guidelines, and that gets into translation to patients, T2, what works in the real world. And then you're trying to work out clinical effectiveness, which then gets into T3, which are really implementation and dissemination. And you're asking the question, can we change a practice? And then we get to what I would say is population health, and then translation to a population. Now, I think it's going to be much further, because really what population health leads to is really implementation research. And what you're going to hear about, which you're all going to be part of for the future, is really precision medicine. And that's, again, such an area. We've entered the omics field. We're understanding so much more about the disease. We're translating it, into human studies, and really precision medicine is working with populations that will be affected by an intervention rather than choosing, which is studies, like we often do in phase 3, where we choose the patients. They're not always population based. So we really are going to need to take it certainly into the population, into the context. And really, I think that you stand at the critical translation of these new and emerging data that's coming from genomic, proteomic, metabolomic, transcriptomic research, because you'll know the patients. And even though you don't, I don't understand all this big data that's coming along now, but you will be able to work effectively with those at the bench, working with those in clinical trials, and then translate it, hopefully, into patients and ultimately into precision medicine.
Thank you. And Dr. Hwang, can you tell us a little bit, in particular, your knowledge and experience in mechanistic human research, and how in diabetes that's particularly important?
Oh, sure. Before I go into that, though, I want to just build on what Dr. Schatz was saying with that slide. And as I'm looking in the chat, I'm seeing all these like awesome topics that you guys are working on. And and what I would say is, Dr. Schatz had said, find a place where things are buzzing, right? And so you need to be like, you've got these great topics, are all really important topics, and assess your landscape and see like what are the areas that your institution or your microenvironment are really good at, and then try to like see how you can fit your clinical question or your research question into this sort of framework that in this slide here. And then and I would say that sometimes when you're following the question, you don't have to always stay in one particular box. You're kind of shifting a little bit, depending on where the scientific question is taking you, and building collaborations with people who can help you and support you, is really, I think, where the new stuff comes from, and we can really take your science to a novel direction. And like for me personally, I also have a particular soft spot in my heart for mechanistic human research, because I think it's particularly relevant in diabetes and obesity work. And that's sort of, I think, where the T1 box would be, where you really want to show so many exciting findings that we show in mice or rats or things like that don't quite translate to humans. And so being able to perform or conduct human studies, but where you really rigorously study like smaller groups of people, really deeply understand their physiology, sometimes by doing some of the classic metabolic techniques like the hyperinsulinemic clamp or even OGTTs or mixed meal tests or frequent sampling tests. Those type of tools, I think, still have a really important role in helping us understand, because we still actually don't know a lot about the physiology. We know a ton, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And so that's where I would say. And then the other thing I would say is that in my own lab, I started off as doing like much more clinical efficacy work, and then have moved towards more mechanistic human work. And then I've gotten to a point sometimes in my research where I'm like, oh, I can't do this in a human, but I really want to know, a little bit deeper. And so, so then I partnered with some more basic science researchers, and collaborate with them. And then we kind of take the human studies a little bit deeper in that direction. So all this to say that, I think this slide is a great framework that you can use actually to help think about your strategy for how you're going to attack your scientific question.
Thank you. And I think I really enjoy, can we keep the slide up for just one more moment, please? I think one of the things that our fellows sometimes struggle with is wanting to have the perfect lab, the perfect mentor that's going to answer exactly the question that they have. But what this highlights is how important methodology is in fellowship too. And not have the exact mentor, but as Dr. Hwang mentioned, also you may partner, and just learning these different tools that you have and how you might go between T1, T2 can be so important. And so what other comments do you all have in your experience from training, any pearls for going in when you don't have the perfect scenario for your lab or for your study?
I can start there because I'm still, I just transitioned to independence. So I've been very lucky that I actually have had wonderful mentors. But I would stress that this mentor with an S. I have teams of, oh, sorry about that. I have teams of mentors actually, because there's not one perfect, in a way, like mentor that can help you with everything actually. And so I really stress that. Um, and so I have I have mentors that aren't even in endocrinology actually, that just kind of help me with help me talk through life related things too, like how work-life balance and academia and things like that. But the other thing I really wanted to stress is that, and this took me a while to learn, which is that when I first started, I went into the lab thinking, oh, I really want to study this question. I think this question is the awesomest question, and I want to do it this way. And that really wasn't the strength of the lab. That really wasn't even the strength of the department. And I just found myself butting, just hitting dead ends. And it wasn't, I'd set up all these meetings. Everyone would be super nice and be like, I think this is great. This is a great idea. I wish I could help you. And it wasn't because people didn't want to help. It's because that they that really wasn't in line with what they were doing, and everyone's busy. So as a pretty junior person, I would say one thing that I realized that really helped me is finding ways that you can align your interests to also help the mentors overall research program as well. And so it doesn't mean you're doing what that mentor is doing, but you're helping further their questions as well as furthering your own. And I've found that to be a very effective sort of alignment where the wind is blowing in the same direction.
You need to join teams. Teams who have a proven record, teams who are publishing, teams who have active grants. It's not to say that you're not going to be successful on your own, but really it's very helpful, because some things, as I said, end up in a dead end. And if you've got lots of other people, or people who are going to take you under their wing, they're going to guide you. I think it is so important at this stage of your career. There are obviously sessions today devoted to mentoring and choosing a mentor. And I think that what Janice has said is absolutely right. One person can't be everything to everyone. One thinks about a spouse, you think that a spouse can hopefully be everything to everyone, or your friendships can be everything to everyone. But I think, we've got different friends, and different friends serve different purposes. And I think that it's the same here. You do need people. A true mentor is an involvement in your personal as well as professional life. And I think that is very important, that you have people who care about you, who are looking out for you and want you to be successful.
Thank you. And that's pretty universal advice. If for those who are not envisioning a research career, I think that's excellent advice for a clinical, having senior mentors who are advocates for your practice environment is very helpful too. I wish we had more time. There's so many more questions we have, but I want to leave our fellows with pearls from your experience. And so maybe in our closing minute or two, could we ask each of you to provide us with any final thoughts or any advice you wish someone had given you at the beginning of your research careers?
Work hard, be patient, persevere, and also remember that a satisfying career is really what you're seeking. And Janet has talked a little bit about this, and a career in science hardly seems to be the first choice. And you think about maybe management, information technology, finance. Yeah, they may be more lucrative, and they may be more fulfilling in terms of material gain. But I think more than ever, you need a satisfying career. And those are some things that I was presented with, and I would perhaps close with those similar remarks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just second that. I think I really consider a career in research in any way, because it's a very rich life from a intellectual, emotional perspective. It's very rich. And then I would also second the patience. And one thing that has always stuck with me, I was in one of these talks, and someone was saying that the only corollary with success in research in terms of, maintaining a lengthy career is the persistence in applying for funding and dealing with rejection, and but persisting with following the question. And so be patient and don't give up. It's a wonderful career.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for sharing time with us and pearls from your experience. And we hope that many of our fellows will have successful research careers following in yours and others' footsteps. The scientific sessions is a great way to see some of the see all of those phases, work being done across the phases that we learned about today. So thank you again for your time.